It started like any other quiet afternoon in the neighborhood, birds chirping, dogs being walked, and parents pushing strollers down the sidewalk. But within minutes, that calm shattered, replaced by the wailing sound of ambulance sirens growing louder and closer. The emergency was real, urgent, and terrifying. A baby was in trouble, struggling to breathe, unresponsive, and rapidly fading. Every second counted. The paramedics were flying down the street, racing against time to save a life. But they didn't expect what came next. As they turned onto the street, they hit a wall, metaphorically and literally. Parked smack in the middle of the fire lane was a familiar vehicle, a shiny SUV that had become something of a neighborhood villain. Everyone knew who it belonged to, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, Karen. And once again, she had taken it upon herself to block off emergency access, ignoring the big red letters that clearly read, "No PRKNG, fire lane." Because apparently, her trip to drop off dry cleaning was more important than public safety. The paramedics honked. They shouted, but the SUV didn't move. Time slipped away. Inside the ambulance, the baby's condition got worse. A young mother screamed and cried as her child's chest barely moved. Neighbors gathered, some pulling out their phones, others yelling for Karen, but she was nowhere to be seen. What makes this story so frustrating and honestly heartbreaking is that it could have been avoided. Karen had been warned before, multiple times. Residents had begged her to stop parking there. The HOA had issued notices, but she just didn't care. Rules, according to her, were for everyone else. And now, her entitlement had put a baby's life in danger. What happened next had the entire block in shock. From police involvement to a community finally taking a stand, this incident became more than just another entitled HOA moment. It became a wake-up call. But the real twist, it wasn't the first time she'd done this, and what came out after would leave everyone speechless. Karen wasn't just any neighbor, she was the asterisk neighbor. The kind of person who took the HOA rules and twisted them however she pleased. Everyone on the block knew her by name, or rather, a nickname, HOA Karen. She had a reputation for calling in noise complaints for kids playing outside, sending passive-aggressive notes about lawn lengths, and reporting anyone who dared hang a holiday wreath before the official decorating period. But when it came to her own behavior, different story. She regularly parked in the fire lane just for a minute, even though everyone knew those minutes turned into hours. People had tried to reason with her. One neighbor even printed out the actual city code and highlighted the section about emergency vehicle access. Karen tossed it in the trash, right in front of them. "I live here," she said. "I pay HOA dues like everyone else. If I need to park for 5 minutes, I will." The thing is, it was never 5 minutes. And it wasn't the first time her car blocked a fire lane during an emergency. A few months earlier, a fire truck had to reverse out and reroute because her car was in the way. Luckily, no one was hurt that time. But people started wondering how far it would go before something serious happened. The weird part, Karen didn't seem to understand or care about the danger she was creating. When neighbors confronted her in the past, she claimed they were harassing her. She even tried to fine them through the HOA for intimidation. It was like dealing with someone who lived in their own world, where being right was more important than being reasonable. And yet, the HOA did almost nothing. Maybe because she was on the board, maybe because people were tired of arguing with her, or maybe it was just easier to let it slide than stir up more drama. But this time felt different. This wasn't a holiday lights dispute or a petty argument about recycling bins. A baby had coded. Lives were being affected. The whole neighborhood was shaken. And the question hanging in the air was, how many warnings does someone get before something really breaks? As the ambulance sat trapped behind Karen's SUV, time seemed to freeze. People were shouting, waving their arms, trying to figure out where she was. A few neighbors sprinted toward the local cafe she'd often visited, hoping to find her there. But by the time someone finally spotted her casually strolling out with an iced coffee, the situation had already spiraled. Paramedics had to jump out, grab their equipment, and sprint the rest of the way to the house. They worked on the baby right there in the driveway, trying to stabilize him without full access to their gear. The mother was nearly hysterical, and the father, normally a calm, quiet man, was pacing in circles, fists clenched, face pale with panic. Karen, meanwhile, acted like it was just another day. She saw the scene, looked confused, and said, "Oh, I didn't know I couldn't park there today. That one sentence sent a wave of disbelief through the crowd. No apology, no urgency, just more of the same shrug-it-off attitude that had gotten her into trouble before. The conflict didn't end when the ambulance finally pulled away. That was only the beginning. Word spread fast, first through the group chat, then through the neighborhood Facebook page, and finally, someone posted about it on Reddit, under r/EntitledPeople. The story blew up. People from all over shared similar experiences about HOA nightmares, emergency access issues, and entitled neighbors like Karen. But the most gripping part, many users pointed out something strange. The HOA hadn't taken any real action. Behind the scenes, tension within the HOA board started to crack. One member quietly reached out to the baby's parents, saying they had tried to remove Karen before, but she always managed to shut it down. Another board member hinted at shady tactics, how Karen manipulated meeting minutes and influenced votes by rallying a few loyal friends who never even showed up to community events. Some neighbors started digging. They wanted to see if she had ever actually been fined or cited. What they found raised even more questions: missing documentation, mysteriously lost complaints, and one neighbor who claimed Karen had once threatened legal action when someone tried to tow her car. And through it all, no one really knew. Why did she act this way? Was it just ego? Power? Or was there something else going on that no one had seen yet? The next few days in the neighborhood were tense. People weren't just angry, they were scared. The baby had been admitted to the ICU, and updates from the family were few and far between. Every time someone stepped outside, it felt like the whole street was holding its breath. Some neighbors organized a meeting at the community center, not an official HOA meeting, but a gathering of people who were fed up and wanted answers. They printed out timelines, documented complaints, and brought up photos from previous times Karen had blocked emergency access. Karen didn't show up. She didn't post in the Facebook group. She didn't reply to emails. But her SUV was still parked perfectly in her driveway, untouched. That silence only made things worse. Someone finally called a local news station. Another neighbor forwarded the Reddit thread. It wasn't just a neighborhood issue anymore. It was becoming a public story. The pressure started building on the HOA. They issued a vague email about community cooperation and ongoing investigations, but it didn't sit well with anyone. People wanted accountability. Then something unexpected happened. Late one night, a neighbor walking his dog spotted a man standing by the fire lane with a flashlight. He was taking photos. At first, it looked like just another resident documenting things for evidence. But then he noticed the man placing something under the SUV's windshield. A printed packet. Multiple pages. It wasn't an HOA notice. It looked legal. Word got out that someone, no one knows exactly who, had filed a formal complaint with the city's fire department. That's when things really started to shift. The next morning, there was a marked city vehicle parked on the street. A uniformed officer was walking the block, knocking on doors, asking for witness statements. Karen stayed inside, blinds drawn, porch light off. But whispers were growing louder. People were saying she might lose her position on the HOA, that the fire department could fine her directly, that she could even face something worse if the baby's condition didn't improve. But the most chilling part, someone discovered a pattern. Karen had been warned years ago, in a different neighborhood, for the exact same behavior. That's when everything started to unravel. Just when everyone thought they had a handle on who Karen was and what she'd done, a second twist hit the neighborhood like a shockwave. One of the residents, an older woman named Mrs. Delgado, came forward quietly. She'd lived on the block longer than anyone else and usually kept to herself. But after hearing about the baby and seeing all the news coverage, she said she couldn't stay silent anymore. She pulled out a dusty old file box from her garage. Inside were documents, letters, and printed emails from over 6 years ago, back when Karen first moved into the neighborhood. Turns out, this wasn't just about blocked fire lanes. Mrs. Delgado had tried reporting Karen for something entirely different years ago, tampering with HOA records. She had proof, copies of 2 different sets of meeting minutes from the same night, with completely different vote counts. It looked like Karen had edited and resubmitted documents to reverse a decision the board had originally made against her. No one had believed Mrs. Delgado at the time. They said it was probably a clerical mistake. But now, with everything happening, her story suddenly felt very real. That revelation lit a fire under several neighbors. They started comparing notes, checking old email chains, digging through their own HOA mail. What they found was a pattern: misfiled complaints, mysteriously missing citations, and multiple occasions where Karen had managed to avoid formal warnings. One neighbor even discovered that Karen's supposed friends who'd backed her in board votes were actually people who didn't even live in the neighborhood full-time. Some of them had rental properties but used their ownership to vote by proxy. It looked like Karen had been building a system around her to stay in control. At the same time, tension kept rising about the baby's condition. No one had heard a clear update. The parents had gone silent, understandably focused on their child. But that silence only made the fear worse. Every conversation on the street, every post online, circled back to the same question: what if something permanent happened because no one stopped her sooner? And just when it couldn't get any worse, someone discovered a security camera recording from the day of the incident, one that showed exactly what Karen did when she saw the ambulance coming. And it wasn't what anyone expected. The security camera footage changed everything. It belonged to a neighbor whose camera faced the street and part of Karen's driveway. The video had been running the entire time on the day of the emergency. What it captured wasn't just negligence, it was deliberate. As the ambulance turned onto the street, sirens blaring and lights flashing, Karen was already at her SUV. She looked directly at the approaching vehicle. For a brief moment, she even opened her driver's side door, then paused, hesitated, and calmly closed it again. Instead of moving, she turned around and walked back into her house, coffee in hand, completely ignoring the situation. When the footage was shown at the next HOA emergency meeting, the room fell into silence. People couldn't believe what they were seeing. It wasn't that she hadn't noticed the ambulance. It wasn't even that she didn't understand the danger. She had seen it all, and she chose to walk away. That moment was the breaking point. The fire department launched an official investigation. A city attorney got involved. Karen was removed from the HOA board in an unanimous vote, and the neighborhood moved to formally restrict her parking privileges under city ordinance. But the consequences didn't end there. A few days later, the baby's father returned home and gave an update. His child was stable, still in recovery but out of danger. The relief that washed over the neighborhood was overwhelming. For the first time in weeks, people could breathe. The mother quietly thanked everyone who stood up and fought when she and her family couldn't. And while there was still anger, there was also a sense of unity that hadn't existed before. But just when people thought it was over, the twist came. A letter arrived for the HOA, postmarked from a law office. It wasn't from Karen. It was from a tenant in another community, one that Karen had lived in before. The letter detailed almost the exact same incident: fire lane blocked. Emergency response delayed, but in that case, someone didn't make it. And now that family was preparing to come forward. Because this time, it wasn't just about entitlement. It might have been a pattern all along. The letter from the other community confirmed what many had suspected. This wasn't Karen's first time putting lives at risk. It was a sobering moment. The HOA forwarded everything to the city, and now the investigation was bigger than just their block. Officials were looking into a potential pattern of reckless behavior tied to past incidents, and suddenly, Karen wasn't just a neighborhood problem anymore. She quietly moved out a few weeks later, her house sold under a different agent's name. No goodbye, no explanation, just gone. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood began to heal. The fire lane was repainted with clearer markings, and the city installed visible, no parking, tower way signs. The HOA went through major changes too. Several new members were elected, including the baby's father, who stepped up not out of anger, but to make sure nothing like this ever happened again. They rewrote policies to increase transparency and created a new safety committee, made up of regular residents who wanted to protect their community. The baby's family, after weeks of hospital visits and sleepless nights, finally brought their child home. Neighbors lined the street with balloons and welcome signs, a silent but powerful show of support. People who once barely waved